Welcome to Own Your Heart Health. I'm Dr. Regina Druz, your holistic cardiologist. This week, we will dive into common heart health concerns, uncovering root causes, and unpacking scientific discoveries and controversies. The information provided does not constitute medical advice. Please contact your healthcare practitioner before making any changes that may impact your health. Okay, well, it's another Friday fun day, and I'm in here with a very special guest. But let me tell you my tiny little joke. I played this joke on a lot of my conventional colleagues, right? So when I go to more traditionally allied conferences, let's say cardiology conferences, people always ask me, well, Regina, what is this whole thing? Integrative medicine, functional medicine, what is it exactly are you doing? And remember, I'm speaking to cardiologists who are my colleagues. So these are sort of like hardcore individuals, married to their stents and devices, right? And my guest here, Dr. Coetzee, knows this. So Dr. Oscar or Dr. Coetzee, I'm going to introduce you in 1 second. So what I always tell my conventional colleagues is that functional or integrative medicine is all about M&Ms. And they become very confused and intrigued. And they say, well, what are the M&Ms? And, the M&Ms of functional and integrative medicine are microbiome and mitochondria. And today I'm with Dr. Oscar Coetzee, who is actually going to take us onto the world tour of microbiome ecosystem. Dr. Coetzee, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Regina. It's good to be here. That's a great analogy, by the way, the M&Ms. I might steal that. It's really good.
I need to bring the candy bag next time and just give them out M&Ms and say, this is what functional integrative medicine is all about. But Dr. Oscar, tell us who you are, where you come from. And, I ask my guests the same question. How did you grow up to be who you are today? Tell us.
Yeah, so it's a long story, but I'll shorten it up for you. Okay, so I was born and raised in South Africa and finished my high school and my military service and my first degree there. And my degree was in the field of psychology. And then I came to the United States of America and I applied for a graduate program for Masters in Psychology, which I finished. And then I ended up at Fair Oaks Hospital in Summit, New Jersey, working as a psychologist with codependency counseling, intervention counseling, drug and alcohol, substance abuse kind of specialization. And it was interesting because there was a medical doctor there, a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Mark Gold. And, way back, and this was in the early 90s, he was talking about, hey, you guys should really investigate the components of mental health to nutrition. And, there's nutrients involved and there's all sorts of things that we're not looking at in the psychotherapy and psychiatric model that might be of intrigue. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I was still going to pursue my PhD in psychology at that point. And then my mom got very sick and, flew back to South Africa. And that kind of set me on a journey of, hey, she appeared to be a healthy person, lived a reasonably healthy life, didn't smoke, didn't drink excessively. And boom, all of a sudden, she's super ill. And that was the thing that changed my world, right? So she unfortunately passed away and I came back to the US. And at that point, I decided I'm going to combine the nutrition and the psychological field a little bit. And I kind of built a practice, out of that and also all the metabolic criteria and things that go with it. But I went back to school and finished another master's in nutrition. And then I did a doctorate in nutrition, which put me, where I am today. As far as where I am with the microbiome stuff, as you well know yourself as a functional practitioner, it is literally the base of health, right? And this has been known for many, many years. And I just started to take a real deep dive into the nutraceutical space of it and the understanding of the different microbes and the tentacles that they have in our chronic disease status in this country. And just one thing led to another. And I've had such good outcomes with using, specific strains of probiotics. But it's a lot more than that, and we can kind of get into that and the interaction of it. But I think the most important thing that people need to understand is that as a population, we have literally let our guts down. We take care of our faces and our outward appearance, but, as a population in this country and even in the world, we've really, really discarded our microbiome and really hurt them. And We need to wake up, because they are truly the base of anti-aging, in my opinion. I think it's the base of neurocognitive health, cardiovascular health, your speciality. So it's kind of a wake-up call, that we need to understand it. And before we go any further, I just want people to understand that when people call you an expert in an area, if you understand the complexity of the microbiome and what we haven't discovered yet, I don't think there's anybody that can lay a claim to being an expert, but I guess I'm as expert as you can be.
As you can get.
Yeah.
As close as you can get to
Yeah.
an expert. So it's interesting. I mean, first of all, it's so heartening for me to see that so many people are coming into the field of integrative and functional living longevity medicine. And they're not just coming because of an academic interest, they're coming through personal experiences. And I think, I share with that because, my personal experience and my own body experience of my family, of course, the sort of trying to reevaluate health span and pathway in sickness and in wellness through a different lens. But microbiome, I think, I love that expression, we'll let our guts down for sure. We'll let our hearts down also, despite all the wonderful progress that has been made. But, we'll let our guts down is also bothers me on so many levels because we are seeing some of the things that nobody ever thought we would see, such as, for example, occurrence of colon cancer in younger individuals, right? And we are seeing even this reflected in the screening guidelines for colonoscopy age being pushed towards the younger individuals. So what is going on, Dr. Oscar? Take us through where are the gaps? Why are we thinking about microbiome the right way or the wrong way? And what is that system that we need to think about that could potentially give us an understanding as to what we need to be doing? Could you kind of take us through this, because you have a very unique perspective?
Yeah. So let's start with why I think we've hurt our guts, right? Or insulted our guts. It's not deliberate. It is a process of biological change and, structural change in the way we look at the world and stress levels. But if I take a step back and I say, okay, let's look at the big picture. What were people's guts like 500 years ago? We don't really know, right? We don't know exactly what the composition of their microbiome is. But what we do know is that there are very, very key strains in the human microbiome that need to be elucidated. And these are the ones that we only know of now. There might be some more in the future. There's a couple of strains called keystone bacteria, right? Now, that's not like a medical textbook definition, but it's kind of what we've seen is, what is a keystone strain? Well, if you remove the strain, what is the tentacle effect or the downstream effect that it can have? And if it has many, many effects, for the layperson, it's clearly a keystone. So think of an arch where you have that stone at the top of the arch. That's called a keystone. If you remove that stone, the whole arch can collapse, right?
Collapses.
So that's kind of what we're talking about. So if we look at modern lifestyle, antibiotic use, right? Long term's definitely hurting the microbiome. Not that I'm saying that there isn't a place for antibiotics. I'm just saying the things that are actually affecting it. People that are using things like proton pump inhibitors or stomach acid reducing medication for much longer periods of time that the drug is recommended for,
that are linked to the heart attacks, by the way, as per very large body of research for using standardized medical records.
Yeah, and that's a concern to me. The use of the abuse of proton pump inhibitors is critically involved with the microbiome destruction. So now we have two medications out of the way. There's others as well, but those are the key ones that kind of most of the people are exposed to. Alcohol intake will sterilize the gut. Makes sense because they used to use alcohol in war to sterilize wounds, right? So why wouldn't you be sterilizing the gut, in large excess? Here's an interesting one for your listeners. Diets that are macronutrient isolated. Now, what I mean with that is these people that go on these journeys of ketogenic dieting or carnivore dieting or even FODMAP dieting for people that want to eliminate the symptomology of bloating and distension.
So rigid dietary patterns, dietary patterns that don't necessarily promote metabolic flexibility.
Correct. And look, I mean, there are people that make claims for the carnivore diet and cardiovascular health and the ketogenic diet for maybe XYZ, but then you need to use it as a medicinal intervention, not a permanent lifestyle change. You know what I mean? There are places for diets where they can make an effect. Like, for instance, there's decent amount of research on ketogenic diet and glioblastoma, for instance, right? But that doesn't make the diet perfect for your microbiome. We're not talking about anything but your microbiome here.
And actually for heart failure too. And I always tell our patients that these type of diets, they're in the interventional domain, right? And you and I know that the microbiome needs a foundation. So if there is
Correct.
no foundational diet that is appropriate for microbiome, interventional diets are taking you even further down the wrong path.
Correct. So what do we have so far? Some medications, we have alcohol intake, we have that non-diverse diet. So that means that you're not eating all the colors and the fiber. Let's talk about fiber. The average American is taking in 16 grams of fiber. Ancestrally, it is postulated that people ate between 50 to 120 grams of fiber, right?
Yeah.
So there's another major issue, because these are the things that feed these keystone microbes that we'll mention later, that keep literally 85% of our metabolic health and immunological, expression in a good place. In addition to that, chemotherapy would clearly affect it.
Sure.
And then one of the biggest, most insidious ones is glyphosate, herbicides, and pesticides that are sprayed on our foods. Now, these things literally work like antibiotics. They are called chelators, and for the listeners that don't understand what that means, it's basically something that pulls metal. It extracts minerals out of something. So it's literally designed to take the mineral out of your body and say, no, you're not going to be here. So the consequence of that is, in our microbiome, the bacteria in your gut, I want the listeners to imagine that they have fauna or flora, like flowers in their gut, like microbes are like flowers. And if I take the minerals that feed the flower in my gut, it's going to die. It's going to wilt. Right. So what glyphosate does, it's wilting it. So now we're spraying glyphosate on anything because we want to harvest things earlier. We want to, industrialize all our food sources. And that is a big component. So now if you take all that into consideration, and then we can throw stress into the equation and the fact that we're on phones 24/7 and all the radiation, we can go all is affecting the gut. So in a nutshell, there's not anybody listening in their car or at home to this presentation that is not exposed to this. So here's what we did. We teamed up with a functional laboratory called Diagnostic Solutions Laboratory, and we just asked him, hey, can you guys run some data for us on, maybe the last 17,000 tests that you've run on Stool? Now, for the listeners, this is not a medical test to test for disease. This is more a test that measures how healthy is your gut, right? It's not a disease thing.
Exactly.
And 65% of the population were low in these keystone anaerobes. And
so let me ask you here, because I'm learning, this is all coming very fast into my brain. So these keystone strains, is it something that's sort of like keystone set in stone, like we know that these are the strains and this is what we're going to do? Or is it maybe like every year or every few years we may discover a new strain or define a new strain or upgraded it into keystone strain? Like how does that determination is being made? Because depending on how it's being made, some people may or may not, be regarded as deficient.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, I had several discussions with several microbiologists about this. So the keystone, there's no textbook that states like atherosclerosis, XYZ is associated with this therapeutic. Keystone is a moving goalpost because we discover new and new microbes, so they fall into, the keystone category. However, there's about 5 or 6 really particular keystones, and we'll probably talk about 3 or 4 of them today.
Okay.
That have been shown to be a requirement for optimal health. You mentioned colorectal cancer a little bit earlier.
Yes.
It is well documented in the scientific literature that people with low Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, which is one of the strains of bacteria that we'll talk about. I know it's a very fancy word, so we'll just call it F-Prau.
We will have to spell it out very diligently in our notes.
So Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, for the rest of the conversation, we're going to just call it F-Prau. Okay, so
Okay.
F-Prow, this commensal strain needs to be in your body. What we've seen in geriatric populations, they low in it. So neurocognitive decline, they low in F-Prow. Colorectal cancer, very, very strong correlation between low F-Prow and the colorectal cancer. Now, what you're saying is, hey, we're getting younger and younger people to get colorectal cancer. Now, I'm not saying that low F-Prow is causing colorectal cancer, but clearly the F-Prow's presence helps to mitigate potentially the manifestation of it, right?
So it there's some correlation. Correlation.
Exactly. In addition to that, Faecalibacterium prausnitzii produces a very unique byproduct that feeds the microbiome that makes those flowers in your gut grow again. So that's
why it's a keystone. It holds the arch.
So it's kind of something that would help you more than just a probiotic that you take that is kind of just in your body doing a benefit, but it's not living there, staying there, engrafting, growing, and communicating with the other strains. So a keystone is a bacteria that can go into your gut in the right environment, create the right environment if you put them in the right combination, and they want to live cohesively with you. So what I want to also kind of bring as a bigger point is keystone bacteria to me, and the way I explain it to the lay people when I'm lecturing on this is I don't want you to look at them as bacteria in your gut, like a bunch of bacteria that's just hanging out there and helping you with a little bit of digestion. These bacteria are literally, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, an accessory organ system. Okay, now what I mean with that is they function more like a kidney or a lung or a heart or something like that because they have such benefit to you, and they can actually help stimulate certain byproducts that can help you make new cells. They can communicate with cells on your gut lining to express immune function, to express metabolic function. So they do all these things that help you rejuvenate and regenerate. Yeah, absolutely.
They're regenerative. So they have not only these foundational properties of laying the kind of definitive structure to our microbiome, but they also putting us on a path of regeneration, which is so important, especially as we get older. Absolutely fascinating. So how?
Go ahead.
Tell us about the other key strains and how we find them.
Yeah, so the other key one that I'm sure everybody has heard about is called Akkermansia macinophila, or just Akkermansia. Now that strain is quite incredible, right? And we can have a whole lecture or a whole podcast just on Akkermansia. But Akkermansia, for the layperson, is helping you with insulin sensitivity. It's helping you with fatty acid breakdown. It's helping you with your mitochondrial health, your M&M theory. It's helping with progenitor cells, rejuvenation, regeneration. It is so wide encompassing strain of bacteria. But the key one that I want the listeners to remember about Akkermansia is that it literally helps you to produce endogenous GLP-1. Right? And everybody is always talking about GLP-1 medications and they want to go on them. Well, you have areas in your gut that literally make it for you. Now, if you go look at healthy, lean people and you go look at their microbiome, weight loss resistant people are normally detectably low in Akkermansia. People that have lean, healthy bodies are not low in Akkermansia. Again, it's just postulating an associations here, but it's a pattern, that's starting to manifest itself. And what I can tell you is that if the Akkermansia species is in your gut, right, and it needs to be there because it's like an organ, in my opinion, that Akkermansia species, if you eat enough fiber, which most of us don't, will produce something called a short-chain fatty acid. Okay, let's just call it the byproduct.
SCFAs.
Yeah. That's what your body wants. So Akkermansia produces two short-chain fatty acids. One is called acetate and one is called propionate. Now, these two fatty acids literally go to your cells on your gut lining and they knock on the door of these receptors. right? And we can get really technical or not technical. Just pretend that these things go in there and they knock on the door and say, hey, I'm acetate. I can help you make GLP-1. Do you want to work together? Right? And the body's like, yeah, man, where have you been? I haven't seen you in months.
Exactly. In years
sometimes.
Sometimes I haven't seen you in years.
So now you start getting that into your gut, and now you start producing natural GLP-1. And all of a sudden, you don't crave as much garbage. You start losing weight again when you exercise. You don't have to count calories to the finest nth of the degree, which is a mistake in its own way. So now your body can start modulating and rejuvenating itself. And this is what I always tell people. Think of your microbiome as a youthful playground. Those microbes wake up every morning and they say, what can I do to help Regina? They don't wake up and say, man, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to help Regina because I don't know, man. Today she doesn't wear the right stuff.
We're tired of her and she's not taking good care of us.
They're saying, hey, Regina, I'm going to help you today. All I need you to do is give me a little fiber, give me a couple of colors, give me a couple of reds, greens, yellows. And listen, here's what I'm going to do for you, right? I'm going to give you GLP-1. I'm going to make your body's mitochondria work a lot better. I'm going to help every aspect of how you make energy. All I want from you is just to give me a little bit of help. And they want to continuously do that. But if they're low and you're not eating enough fiber, you can't expect for them to do what they're supposed to do, right? So another strain that we can talk about, so we spoke about Akkermansia, right? We spoke about Faecalibacterium prausnitzia, or F-Prau, the fancy one. Now let's talk about Roseburia. So Roseburia is another keystone strain. Let's just remember.
I love this name, Roseburia. It sounds like a perfume. Roseburia.
It does. Now that strain is very unique. Okay, so that strain, all these strains, by the way, Regina, for your information, as a cardiovascular specialist, they all lower LPS, right, which is drivers in the gut microbiome of inflammation. They lower interleukin-6. They lower tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-1 beta. All the things that we know. And for your listeners, these are inflammatory agents in your body that really cause a lot of cardiovascular or neurocognitive disease.
Let's stop here and sort of make sure that everybody is on the same page, right? So I think what Dr. Oscar is saying is critically important because time and time again, and especially right now, we know that the seat of chronic diseases is inflammatory in origin, right? There are multiple root causes, but what actually executes on these root causes to give a person cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, increased their cancer predispositions, that is an inflammatory process. And we actually know a term, it's one of the hallmarks of aging. It's called inflammaging, right? Inflammation plus aging is inflammaging. And so these inflammatory factors that Dr. Oscar is mentioning, you'll be surprised to know that the origin of the reason why sometimes they go up and affect our other organs is actually gut-based, because gut houses most of our immune cells. It produces hormones, just as you heard. It produces neurotransmitters. It is our first interface that interacts with the outside world. And this is where we start, right? What is that old saying? The path to a heart leads through the gut, so this is exactly where we're at.
Yeah, or what's the other statement? I think it was Hippocrates maybe that said that all diseases start in the gut. Right?
Start in the gut, exactly. Yeah. And it's still true. So many hundreds of years later. Okay, so now our Roseburia.
Yeah.
Or Roseburia.
So remember the rose, right? Or a perfume. I like that analogy. Yes. So Roseburia is a very unique bacteria. Now, let me also first say that all these bacteria that I've mentioned so far are all anaerobic. So they don't like oxygen. They don't want to be around oxygen. Now, that sounds simple enough, but the problem is that it's been very difficult to encapsulate that in a supplement because it's an anaerobe. Right. Anytime that you expose bacteria to oxygen, they die, right? Because they don't want to be around it. So that has been the drawback all these years up until very recently, that we couldn't provide Akkermansia back to you. We couldn't provide Roseburia back to you because we couldn't make a product
Sticks.
that encapsulated it, and it
Yeah,
stayed
the
alive.
product that sticks, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So Roseburia is very interesting. So I'm going to talk about the design of it. So Roseburia is a bacteria, and pretend that it has a little tail at the back, and this tail is kind of just moving like a doggy's tail. And that tail, and this is to show you the intelligence of these microbes, right? It's just absolutely mind-blowing. So this bacteria is in your gut, and this tail is kind of wagging around. And at some point, that tail starts to touch your gut lining, right? Or the cells between your gut and your bloodstream. And the intelligence between the bacteria and your cells in your gut, the tail is starting to scrape on the cells, and the cells are like, "Hey, where have you been? That's so cool to see you." And the bacteria is like, "Hey, man, it's been a while, but I'm back. But hey, let me just scratch you a little bit more. Ooh, that feels good." And that scratching
Massage.
and feeling good actually produces the stimulation of something called hypoxic inducible factor. So these cells now start to express low oxygen levels. So now, because of the low oxygen levels that this bacteria is driving, it makes the entire environment for all those other guys more hospitable.
So it facilitates its own growth.
Correct. So you have one strain that, if the other strains are present, its main job is to do all these anti-inflammatory things, but its main job is to make sure that the environment is co-hospitable for all the other strains that want to be anaerobes. And here's the other caveat. Most of the opportunistic, or the bad guys, they don't like an anaerobic environment. They like more of an aerobic environment.
They like oxygen.
They love oxygen, right? And that's a lot of your pathogens and your opportunists and things like that. So imagine now, if I have a bunch of good guys that is kind of part of our body, it's like an organ system that works with us. And why I'm saying it's an organ system, you should understand now. You have a tail of a bacteria that touches your cell, and then you start making something. Or the bacteria is producing something that helps you make new cells. That's got to be somewhat part of us, right? I don't think that can be something that is just this alien thing living in the world. But as these guys are now creating this hypoxic environment or low oxygen environment, all of a sudden, all the bad dudes are like, "Hey, you're choking me to death. You're smothering me." And that's the whole point, right? So we want to get them, crowded out. And this is what we've seen in clinical trials, Regina, which is so interesting. Initially, all we wanted to see is, if we give people this strain of probiotic, can we increase Akkermansia? Can we increase Roseburia? Can we increase Faecalibacterium prausnitzii? Because we know that all those strains of bacteria are cardiovascular related, metabolic related, neurocognitive related, rejuvenative related, regenerative related. There's massive importance in having those microbes. And when we're stimulating those microbes with fiber and polyphenols, and we create this environment, we saw that we started to completely eradicate opportunistic and some pathogenic bacteria without using drugs, antimicrobial.
Antimicrobials, yeah.
That's so mind-blowing to me, right? And I'm not saying that it's replacing anything. I'm just saying that was not the objective of the clinical trial. The objective of the clinical trial, pre-test, low Akkermansia, post-test, elevated Akkermansia. We saw that. But the rest of the test, lower opportunistic bacterial overgrowth, better zonulin, which means that there's better gate control.
Tighter junctions.
Yeah, tighter junctions. We saw increases in other strains of good bacteria without providing them. So Bifidobacterium numbers went up, lactobacillus bacteria numbers went up, and that just shows
those are key, and so hard actually to manipulate with conventional probiotics. I'm almost giving up on conventional probiotics at this point.
Well, that's a good point to quickly discuss, right? So I think there's a lot of data that supports traditional probiotics to be efficacious in some clinical trials, right? I mean, we know that certain strains have shown to help people with diarrhea. We know that certain strains have
like VSL, and there is a lot of good information on that.
But they're transient, right? They don't stay, they don't engraft, they don't grow. You got to keep taking them to have the same effect. And truly, they just have a little bit of a pixie dust effect, right? I mean, but it's not. And let me explain this to the listeners. People think that you take a probiotic and all of a sudden you change the world. It'll be the same theory as you thinking, I have a little, remember in the old days when we used to have the bottles of ink in school, right? Maybe
Yeah,
from you coming from Russia, you still had that.
Yeah, well, I had that since, first through third grade. So my fingers were always stained.
Blue. So imagine
Blue.
you have one of those little bottles of ink. Okay, now you go to the biggest pond in your area and you take that and you dip it into the lake and you're like, why is the lake not turning blue? Because you just sprinkling a little bit of
it was a drop. It was a drop in the lake, a few drops.
Exactly. But what we see with these anaerobic strains is we give you a small amount, but when they get down there and your cells start seeing, oh, Roseburia is back, Akkermansia is back, they start working together, and then they start to repopulate the gut. So that's the key component. You have a small amount that you're inserting, and then that insertion process with the right fertilizer, right, which would be fiber.
It's compounding up on itself.
It starts to engraft. And the studies have shown clinically that the engraftment without any support could be up to 6 months. Now, clearly, we don't want that. We want to give the support to make the engraftment. Now, what we also have seen is that, in my opinion, when you have these keystone strains in abundance, they will help keep the other ones around longer because they want to work together
so there is synergy. So there is opportunity for synergy. So how would, I have a question for you. First of all, this is fascinating. And I am 100% going to run out and test myself to see if I have any Roseburia. I think, and of course, Akkermansia and F-Prow, I think my test is long overdue. But so from the practical standpoint, right? Because you alluded a couple of times to the protocol, and maybe you can share some information that you learned that you directly brought into the clinical domain from these research trials, right? What would be a good opportunity for our listeners? Like, how would they approach this, right? Is there testing involved? What would you advise with that regard of testing? What is a protocol? I mean, certainly fiber. I support you in that 100%. And fiber is so easy to get. You don't need anything fancy. You could literally go to Whole Foods and get organic psyllium husks and increase your fiber. It comes in a bag and it's not actually that expensive. And so what would be the practical implementation steps for an individual to say, hey, do I have those keystone strains? And if I don't have enough, or if I have an imbalance, this is what I can do to really make it better for myself.
Yeah, great question. So remember when I started this presentation or discussion today, we spoke about what causes us to be low in them. So there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have one, all three, or two of these low. All right. So here's what you can do. In my opinion, all functional docs should run one stool test on every one of their patients once a year. Just the way you do a CBC or a CMP, standard blood work makeup, cardio panel. You should have a stool test once a year. And they're not that expensive. You can do them for like $289. And for the listeners, that's like 6 cups of latte at Starbucks, right? I mean, it's not even money. And it's your health. And you could literally, in that stool test, which you do at home, it's non-invasive. A kit gets sent to your house. You do an analysis. The test kit comes back, and you get the results. Once you have those results, you can see those strains. They will be very well indicated in the keystone commensal category in those particular tests. And when you're low, you start taking this probiotic as a strain. Here's what we also found in clinical studies. When Akkermansia is low, Roseburia is normal, F-Prow is normal, you just take Akkermansia, it doesn't move it. If you take the 3 of them together or the 4, that moves it.
Of course, so that's this energy. You're tapping into this energy.
Correct. We also have seen when they're high, sometimes the body compensates. The body will have high Akkermansia because it's low in the other ones. So it's trying to make something to bring the other ones back. That's kind of what you can see the patterns on, And basically, the ones that were high, we put them on the strain, and that high became normal. So even though it's high and we have the product in there that could make it higher, it doesn't make it higher, if that makes any sense.
So there is equilibration.
Yeah. So it's literally like this natural ability that these microbes have is when you high, I know you're just compensating, man. It's like people in an office and 2 people are out sick and the one person is doing all the job. of all the other people. And when they finally come back, it's a little bit easier. You know what I mean?
Sure, exactly.
Okay, so let's say you've done a stool test and one of those are high, low, two of them are high, low. It doesn't matter. If any of them are out of range, you start taking the strain. You take it for approximately 12 weeks. It's one small cap per day for 12 weeks. This is what we've seen clinically to reinsert it. So I want you or the listeners to think of this probiotic as a seed. Okay, and you're putting the seed in the gut, and that seed knows exactly where it needs to go and what it needs to do. And it will start activating by itself, but it'll be really helpful if you eat more fiber, like you mentioned. Start eating more colors, a more Mediterranean, more diverse, not macro-isolated diet.
What we call phytonutrient-rich diet, or sometimes it goes by whole foods plant-based, but regardless of how it's called, the idea is the same.
Correct. Just increase it. Because we've literally seen that if you eat this with fiber, unlike other probiotics where people sometimes tell you to take it without food, I'm strongly recommended you take it with fiber, right? Because it's almost like, hey, thank you, team player. Let's go make this work. So what I then tell people is, generally speaking, we're going to publish something on this very shortly, the research that we've been working on.
And you will send us this article so that we'll share with our listeners.
I'll come back.
You'll come back for the research. You got it. Yeah. I have to hear about that Roseburia situation.
Yeah. So basically, after the 12-week period, it's going to be individually dependent how often you should still take it intermittently, right? So what I mean with that is, let's say the person is now eating a Mediterranean diet, they're eating colors, they're eating seasonal, they're eating a lot of fiber. And with all the outside influences that we're going to still expose to, I would still say that you need to take it at least once a quarter. Right, like once every 3 months, you need to take it.
So maintenance track.
Yeah, but you're also going to do the testing, right, to see where you're at. For people that are living a very compromised lifestyle, they do not want to get off a keto or a carnivore diet, and they drink alcohol or whatever. You need to take it consistently, right, because it will do the job that it's supposed to do, but you would need to take it more frequently. So that's completely up to the individual. So it's really simple. You take the probiotic strain, you change your diet with more fiber, and you retest at some point to see your status. So it's not like you have to change every single thing that you're doing in your world. If you decide that you're not going to eat as much fiber, you need to take this probiotic a lot more consistently.
A little bit. So it's interesting because a lot of what you're presenting is, in functional medicine, and I know you know this, is that one of our fundamental protocols for the gut is called 5R, right? So we have this 5R protocol, and the first R is remove. And I find it's so difficult sometimes for patients to remove those environmental influences, alcohol, sleep disruption, chronic stressful exposure, very challenging, and all the other toxins are challenging to remove. But once a person has passed the removal stage, our next stages are often include the second R is replace, because sometimes, fiber, we're mentioning fiber a lot, but fiber may be difficult to digest for a lot of individuals. So when the stool testing is done, we could see, for example, is there a need to replace digestive enzymes? Is there a need to replace perhaps butyrate? Because, right now the person is low in butyrate, but down the line, they may actually improve. And then we go into repair. And this is where, specific supplementation and nutritional adjustment to actually repair those tight junctions, to kind of reestablish the cellular integrity of the gut is so critical. And then we go to re-inoculate. That's where the probiotics come in. And then, of course, we go into what we know as rebalance, right? We want to go back to the beginning of that 5R and say, well, how well did you do with your remove? How well did you do with your replace? How well did you do with your repair? How well do you do with your re-inoculate? And I think what you are describing is that if people sort of are not as successful with remove and maybe replace, then of course re-inoculation will play a more prominent role. If they're a little bit more successful, you don't probably have to re-inoculate as frequently. So it's a dynamic equilibrium, which is what a lot of patients who are excelling at longevity. This is what we see. This has actually been described in the literature. This sort of dynamic longevity equilibrium that honestly starts in the gut, starts in that huge microbiome organ. Fascinating. So what is that probiotic that you're mentioning? Tell us a little bit more about that.
The name of the probiotic is simple. It's called Complete Commensal, right? So we're giving
Complete Commensal. I like that. Complete Commensal.
And there's two other strains in there that are Bifidobacterium strains that are more there for supporting role of fermenting starches so that you can feed these other main players. And I wanted to mention one more that is a separate strain from the Complete Commensal that we spoke about. And that is called something Anaerostipes cacae. I know that's another really complicated.
Okay, I have to learn to pronounce it because like it. Anaerostipes cacae. Okay.
Yes.
I'm trying.
I'll send you all the spelling of this so when people go on.
Please.
That's why we decided in the Complete Commensal, let's keep the name simple. We don't want to get it all complicated.
Honestly, right? I think you should have called it Command and Control. This is like, complete after everything that we've discussed, Complete Commensal. No, it's a Command and Control. Just that's it.
That's true. So this Anaerostipes cacae strain is also an anaerobe, and it has a very, very unique purpose. You mentioned earlier butyrate, and that's the only reason that came to me. So butyrate, for the listeners that don't know, and I'm sure your listeners are very educated, but it's basically an extremely important short-chain fatty acid or substrate that bacteria produce to heal the gut lining, right? And apart from that, it has other functions like energy pathway functions. It actually actively goes into the Krebs cycle to make more energy, or the mitochondria. But what is important about butyrate is that it heals the gut lining. So Anaerostipes cacae is the highest producing butyrate anaerobic strain bacteria known to our scientific knowledge. So it's literally the one that gets into the gut and will produce the most benefit. It also loves lactate. So that means that if you're eating your other probiotics and your yogurts and the strains that make lactate, you can actually enforce the feeding of it. But I'll tell you an interesting clinical study on this. Anaerostipes cacae was discovered by looking at babies that had milk allergies, cow milk allergies. And they compared it to babies that didn't have cow milk allergies. And the only thing that they found to be substantially different in the microbiome setup was this strain. So this strain of Anaerostipes cacae was lacking in the kids that had cow's milk allergies. So they started to isolate the strain, and they put the strain into mice and rat models and things like that. And this is now not for the listeners to run away with this and think that they're going to fix this problem, but they even improved anaphylaxis in mice with this. Now, that's a pretty remarkable achievement. We don't promote that for a human thing.
Sure.
But what we have seen in humans is that if people have dairy sensitivity, gluten sensitivity, and food intolerances and things like that, if they start to take this Anaerostipes cacae strain, it's a major butyrate producer, it fixes the gut lining, and people can start eating the foods that they reacted to without the bloating, without the side effects. So that's why we throw in that strain. So in our clinical trials, we've combined Anaerostipes cacae with Complete Commensal in one arm, and with the other arm, we just had Complete Commensal, and we did some of the back and forth analytics, and both of them showed tremendous promise. And then we did Anaerostipes alone in one as well. And where Anaerostipes stands out is for food intolerances, food sensitivities. I'm not going to throw the word allergy in there, because allergy, you and I both know at a medical level,
it's a little different mechanism, but food sensitivities is fair.
Yeah. So if you combine the two, it's perfect for that typical IBS person that has bloating, distension. They can't eat all the foods. That they're low in these anaerobes. They have low energy. They have metabolic resistance issues, like metabolic syndrome related criteria. If you combine these two strains, you have a big bang for your buck on the anaerobic status. And one final point, we looked in the literature at the data on anaerobic strains and centenarians for whatever research was available. And they found 11 strains of very unique bacteria and centenarians at the high level. And all 4 of these strains that we spoke about were
present. Yes.
Yeah. So, there's got to be something for that from a longevity standpoint as well.
100%. It's fascinating because I'm in the final stages of revisions for my first ever book. It's called Longevity Switches.
Oh,
And
awesome.
yes, and in that book, I'm putting forward the idea of health operating system. And of course, microbiome is one of its components. So it made me take a look at the what's called supercentenarians. And, supercentenarians
Interesting.
are
Okay.
people who have lived beyond the age of 112, like over 100 years old usually. So they're
Yeah.
supercentenarians. And one of them recently passed away. Her name was Maria. She was from a tiny little Spanish village. And, in the research papers, she was known as M1116 because she passed at 116 years and 47 days or
Oh my
something
goodness.
along those lines. And so,
Wow.
and one of the features that was so profound because she allowed investigators to take multiple samples, right? It's and they've been doing it for years. And from university in Spain, the department that studied it. So, and they have figured out that she had a really remarkable microbiome composition. She, of course, lived in a Mediterranean lifestyle. There was a high dairy consumption. She didn't drink. She didn't smoke. Her life was sort of like very regimented. She had a lot of other very interesting findings, some of them counterintuitive. For example, her telomeres were very, very short, something that we typically associate with lower longevity, but in
Right.
her case, it may have been cancer protective. But probably the primary reason, for her, extraordinary setup was that microbiome setup, because it also led her to low levels of inflammation and, good mitochondrial function, not
Yeah.
necessarily tremendous frailty. So this is fascinating to me because, we no longer need to think that chronological years and aging of the organs need to march in sync. We can dissociate our chronological aging from biological aging if we do it right. And that's where that whole concept of microbiome as the universe that you manipulate, the organ that you manipulate to do so is really, this is something that we can do. I mean, it's not that difficult to get a stool test. We offer it to our patients. It's
Yeah.
not that challenging to understand the 5R program. It's not that challenging to get, I'm going to call it command and control instead of complete commensal. It's not that challenging to get command and control probiotic in addition to everything else.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not rocket science. I mean, it is for you and I because we're looking at the inner workings of it, but for people can do this even now. So it's really all about, taking ownership of that particular area of your health and being willing to make these changes.
Yeah, you have so many good points there, and the one that I want to expand upon is let's call it longevity or anti-aging, whichever way you want to look at. And we as a world, we're going around that completely incorrectly. Like for instance, if we go look at this 116-year-old person, and let's say we could go back in time and we could see her at 90. I can assure you that she didn't look like a model. She probably had wrinkles and she probably had gray hair and she didn't have all puffy.
Yeah, she looked her age. She did look her age.
Yeah. So the point that I'm trying to make is, we keep working on this anti-aging thing from the outside and we're trying to, do what we can to manipulate how many wrinkles we have. But at the end of the day, the only way that you can promote anti-aging is from the inside out, right? I mean, you have to provide the body with the things that it can feel that it's young again. And this is the opportunity. Okay. And I'll take another study for you. And this is an animal model originated, but we're going to learn more about this as we go along with these anaerobes. And there's probably more anaerobes coming in the next 5 to 7 years, right? We'll probably add to the equation as we get better. But what they did is they took an old mouse and a young mouse, and they had them next to each other. And what they did is they took the microbiome from the young mouse and planted it into the old mouse, right? And within 2 weeks to 3 weeks, they saw better mitochondrial function, better energy, resolution, better recovery from exercise. And this freaking mouse, even though he was gray, was running around like a crazy one. Okay. What they did also is they took the microbiome from the old mouse and put it into the young mouse. Now,
and I'm sure it aged.
No, it did nothing. That's the interesting thing. So what that proves to us on very anecdotal levels is that the body recognizes young microbial environments.
The signature.
Correct. So there's some sort of a phenotype association here that is interesting to research. So just so that the listeners understand, what makes this probiotic also very unique is that it comes from a human young donor pool that have been investigated and checked and researched on whatever perfect genetic composition that you could have. Now, people are automatically going to say, wait a minute. Are you saying that you're giving me a fecal transplant here?
No.
No, absolutely not. This is something called microbial ecosystem therapeutics. And what I want people to understand in real layman's terms, imagine if you can take the fecal matter, because we know that fecal matter transplants help people with C. diff, and so it's shown clinically to have really good effect in people, but the side effect is that for immunocompromised people, it's a danger. FDA is actually in 2019 said you can't do fecal transplant on immunosuppressive people. It's dangerous. There's all sorts of expression stuff that we don't know about. So imagine that you can have a healthy individual with no disease state, and you can extract just the microbes without the yuckiness. You're not bringing any of the nastiness out of that extraction. And you can encapsulate that in a community and put it in your body. Then you have that young mouse, old mouse theory. And that's literally what this is, right? So it is a probiotic with live, active, cultured bacteria. And if you look at all other probiotics, they all come from dairy sources, fermentation sources. That's the difference, right? That you have from one to the other one. And this is why I think we're seeing this level of engraftment, because the body recognizes it. It's like, okay, well, this is like a bacteria that I know. It's human donation. I can work with this, right? You can't take the kidney of a dog and plant it into a human, right? You got to take the kidney of a human and put it into a human.
But this is fascinating because it almost makes me think that, there is some popularity, for example, to banking umbilical cord blood, right? For stem cells purposes. And we know when babies come into the world, they rapidly become colonized with all of the bacteria that, we colonize with. But of course, they have healthier guts because they're supported usually by mother's milk, and they hadn't had a chance yet to experience all these bad influences. I almost feel like this technology should allow us to, have material for our own microbiome therapeutic down the line, sort of a little bit out there, but, potentially something that people may eventually, science will allow us to get to that point and say, hey, this is what we can do.
They're already going there, Regina,
really?
For instance. Yeah. And I'm not talking about, I'm sure at some point you'll be able to say, hey, who's the strongest. So you'll be able to kind of, at some point, probably in the next 100 years, say, listen, I don't want any of this negativity. Let's take the extraction of this person in our family line that we know genetically.
Exactly, that we know, like my grandfather, he lived till 96, my husband's grandma, 99. And they had very difficult lives, but you want some of that, secret sauce, literally secret sauce that they possessed.
Yeah, but I think, if you look at the centenarian that you're talking about, 116, the age, I think if you look at her microbiome, it was probably a young microbiome in an older body.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Exactly it.
So I don't always want to tell people that chronological age is the only measurement of a young microbiome. I think a young microbiome is how revitalized, how quickly do they rejuvenate, how well are you feeding them? That's a young microbiome, because these microbes don't live 60 years. They have a short shelf life, but they keep.
But they renew themselves, and I think that's that comes back to my earlier point about we finally have the opportunity, and this is why I don't like to call this sort of science or clinical practice anti-aging. It's more along the lines of longevity medicine, because we finally have this dissociation where the chronological age and biological age could be uncoupled. depending on what you do, right? They could either be super coupled, which means that one is aging biologically faster
Yeah.
than the chronology, or they can be uncoupled so that the biological age is actually younger than the chronological age. And so I think that's where this brilliant opportunity is to manipulate what we have carried in us for millennia, those keystone bacteria. I mean, that's just beyond fascinating.
Yeah, and one more, the Faecalibacterium prausnitzii is known to produce something else called salicylic acid, and that's really involved with skin health. So I was speaking to a dermatologist, ironically, in the research period, because we were talking to several people, and she was telling me that anecdotally she's been looking at stool tests for years with people with dermatological, and she's very unique because there's not a lot of people that integratively practice dermatology, right? So she's booked out to the gills, for the next. So there's for people in the future want to go to dermatology for functional dermatology might be the area you want to go into. And she was telling me that I think it was 85 or 87% of her patients were low in FPROW. And when she started to give them FPROW, especially since the introduction of this now, she was able to get rid of things like eczema, cystic acne, and things to that effect because they could see FPROW increase. So these things just have so many tentacles. The other thing with FPROW is, for instance, it's highly associated with major depressive disorder because bacteria in the gut produce these hormones and amino acids like tryptophan that make serotonin. And if you put those things back, you have it. But anyway, just before we shut down, the changes in where this is going, there's definitely going to be an ethnic investigation into the fecal thing. So maybe, an Asian donor versus a mid-sub-Saharan African donor versus I think that's kind of where, potentially the future of this stuff is going to go. And who knows, where the crazy scientists would go. Maybe they'll start extracting fecal matter from a top-level athlete and try and insert it in somebody else, which I always guard them against because I'll tell you what, some of the worst guts I've ever seen are top-level athletes.
Competitive athletes.
They're overtrained.
Yeah, of course. They overtrain and there is a lot of stress. And I think this is where, with contemporary science and, I'm a big fan, of course, of artificial intelligence, using it on a single, every single day. And I'm sure you do too, especially in your experiments. I honestly think that we're going to come to the point, and it's going to happen quicker than people realize, is that we're going to come to the point where digital twins will become the replicas of what we are, and we will be able to apply these various permutations, if you will, to form a projection for the future. And, we're already doing it at the holistic heart centers because we're taking the information from those patients who responded positively to lifestyle change, to supplementation. And we could measure, for example, regression of the plaque in the carotid arteries. And given long enough time, even regression of the plaque in the coronary arteries, we could, so we can go beyond just, looking at biometrics, for example, and biomarkers and actually seeing the direct tissue impact. And that opportunity to figure out before you invest time and money into a specific path, what is the likely outcome and how you should position yourself. That is going to be, I'm not going to call it medicine 3.0, but that's just going to be medicine, maybe 4.0 or medicine.ai, because this is really where this is going with. And like even what you're mentioning, integrative dermatologists, just being able to take that experience from someone else's practice and bring it in, to benefit other individuals. Dr. Oscar, this has been probably one of my most favorite episodes.
Glad to hear that.
Yes, tons of great information to our listeners. We will drop all the links. I promise to the best of my ability, we will spell out these names correctly. So Dr. Oscar, you will help us to spell out these names. We will provide the links to these probiotics. I'm going to call them command and control, but they're called complete commensals actually. And if you're interested in working with us in this type of medicine, it's super easy to start. You just send us a text or place us a call, and and here we are, and we'll go with it. Thank you so much for being a guest on today's show.
It was really fun. I hope to come back when we have some of the research, and then we can
100%. We would love that research. And when you do come back, I will tell you about my composition of Akkermansia and Roseburia, because now I'm motivated now. I have to get these results. So people, you will see my poop results on air. So get ready.
Let's do it for the next one. I'll come and analyze it for you.
You go. Perfect. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to Own Your Heart Health with Dr. Regina Druz. This podcast is powered by Holistic Heart Centers. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about our services, visit holisticheartcenters.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. See you next week.